we have a very deep question, a very sensitive question. And that question has to do with suicide. If a believer, something happens, we don't know the situation, things pop up, let's say they take their own life. Some people would pronounce, well, that person's definitely has no shot at going to heaven. And then there's other people that say, wait a minute, he's a believer. But there's a lot of, it's a loaded question. Could you answer that according to Scripture, your experiences? You've had to counsel many, many people in your lifetime in some really hard situations. Could you?
Yeah, I've walked through several relationships with people that I'm very close to that lost a loved one by way of suicide, and it is very sensitive. Now, let me first address a couple of things about suicide. Suicide, if it's done with total unbelief, disregarding that there's a God, that's a different story. And let me pursue that for a moment, because I have quite a different take on suicide, okay? But my personal belief is that suicide is the worst way that you could disrespect God if that's the motive, okay? In other words, you're saying, you can't help me, I have no hope, I really don't believe in a life after, because I don't believe in a hell, I don't believe in anything. It has to be that way. Now, there are people that do it. We had a councilman that I lived across the street from, okay, that was facing, federal prison time. And instead of facing his problems with children, I knew his children, he wrote a note and shot himself in the head. To me, that person deliberately killed themselves because of not wanting to face certain consequences, okay? To me, that right there doesn't tell me anything but unbelief, okay, in that situation, okay? In another situation, a bipolar girl, took her father's gun and wrote a beautiful letter to Jesus and to the parents. Now, she was mentally unstable. I knew the girl, okay? And it all has to do, Pastor Sean, with God will judge the heart of the person. Like the worst one that I dealt with was my professor at school. He taught me how to street witness. He had the catacombs ministry down in San Antonio. And we were taking a guy off the street into a program when we were hit broadside. He was in the front seat. I was in the back seat. And he took the brunt of the hit, and his whole jaw was shattered. And he then began to have this jerking with the injury.
Like a nervous disorder.
Yeah, it was a constant twitch, and he had his jaw wired shut. He could only eat yogurts or liquids. He couldn't eat solids, and it was a terrible situation. And he went quite a few years. He came down, visited me in New Orleans, and bore his heart to me. And he says, I'm tormented. I can't sleep at night, And he even, there was possibly a cure with some snake venom he had heard about, which was really weird. But ultimately, he took his life. Now, I know he loved Jesus, and I know he loved him with all of his heart. But there comes a mental capacity. If you look at Samson, okay, was that suicide when he pulled the pillars down, knowing he would kill himself?
Right.
But was he doing it in an act of, destroying the 3,000 Philistines with him?
Right.
How do you look at that? Right. So, yeah, it's a tough question, but here's how I would answer it. If you're doing it with no faith, you're not born again, you don't believe there's a God, you just think you can escape this world, you're not going to wake up, and you're not going to face a judgment, you're not going to face a living God, that to me is the worst case suicide. But if it's a mental issue, in the case a physical issue, where you don't know, you're not in your right mind,
Right.
and you're just trying to stop the pain or
Right,
whatever. And then you go into euthanasia. Is that right? I mean, I watched my dad go from a strapping 200 and something pound man down to under 100 pounds and held him in my arms when he died, okay? And, you know, do we want a person to suffer when they have a terminal illness with no cure? You know, those are tough questions. And, you know, I would err on the side of compassion, you know, having compassion for people. But I can clearly say, if you're doing it in defiance, it's the worst thing you could do. If you're doing it because you have some physical or mental disability that drives you and you're not in your right mind, I would say, you know, God's a merciful God.
God looks at the heart, and we don't know that, and that's what it comes down to.
I think that's the right answer.